Now, obviously, while we're on the subject of the inquiry, I think you ought to know, and it hasn't actually been mentioned today, but many of you will know that the original members of the inquiry, the panel, Professor Michael Lamb of Cambridge, Susan O'Brien QC, and Glenn Houston, the three people on the panel all resigned, and they'd all agreed on one thing, and that was interference of the Scottish Government in the independence of the inquiry. In fact, Susan O'Brien went as far as to say she did not think that any possible independent, proper inquiry could possibly take place under the system as it was at the moment, where the Scottish Government could interfere. Now, again, as many of you know, we have proved that the entire Scottish Cabinet that existed on the 26th of May, which included Alex Salmond, Nicola Sturgeon and John Swinney, had all breached 10.1 and 21.1 of the Freedom of Information Scotland Act, as gained by the Information Commissioner himself, Mr Kevin Dunyan. Moreover, the Scottish Government still ignored that. They didn't do anything about it, to put it right. And on the 11th of July 2011, Mr Dunyan made a public announcement that unless the entire Scottish Cabinet came forward with an answer to this, they would face criminal charges of contempt of court. They had 24 hours. Now, most of you are here from Scotland. Did any of you read that in the paper?
No.
Don't you think that would be the #1 story?
Yeah.
Should have been.
Even perhaps in England, I think, with all the terrible things going on here and the corruption, there's plenty of it in England, I can tell you. Even in England, you would actually, I'm sure that even with the Conservative supporting papers, if the Conservative government were in place within 24 hours of the whole cabinet facing criminal charges, it would be #1 news everywhere, wouldn't it? But it was stopped in Scotland. And the person who was mostly responsible for stopping it was someone I think many of you will have heard of before, Peter Watson of Levy and McRae, who was the solicitor of Elish Angelini and Alex Salmond. Editors all over Scotland and broadcasters were threatened over this with dire retribution if they dared to mention anything about this issue and indeed the Holy Grail case itself. So we have a very serious situation there. I'm going to say that, I'm just talking about Scotland at the moment, but I am dealing with some, mainly because of my involvement in the Holy Grail case, I do get invited to talk all over the UK and so forth, which is very good because people are very interested. And as a result, I'm actually assisting, or it's not my main case, I don't really deal with Holy Grail's case until it's completed. But I'm dealing with terrible cases in the UK at the moment, including Melanie Shaw, Samantha Baldwin, and Sir Edward Heath. What I can tell you, without going into details, I have provided expert witness documentation to the police over Sir Edward Heath. You will probably note, and this obviously is relevant, Sir Edward Heath is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, so it's as relevant to Scotland as it is to any other of the countries in the Union. What I had discovered, and through some of the work that was done, was that Sir Edward, in his government, which was in power between 1970 and 1974, had covertly covered up sexual abuse by Conservative MPs. How do we know this? It is because the Chief Whip at the time, Tim Fortescue, was interviewed on BBC television in 1995 and actually openly admitted that certain members came forward with problems with little boys. And he went to say, we protected them, and then they would do exactly what they were told. So there was a member of the government admitting covertly that the British government was concealing serious crimes from the police. Now, whether Heath is convicted or what will happen, because he's dead anyway, but whatever happens to Mr. Heath, whether he's exonerated or not, he may be exonerated, I don't know exactly what amount of evidence and how strong the evidence is against Sir Edward. But one thing for sure is he and the other members of the Conservative government were implicated in covering up serious crimes against children. Now, when we talked about with Vicky mentioning things, obviously this is just go right to the top. And I think at the present time, I think the very least that we might reasonably expect is for the current Prime Minister, Theresa May, to make a public apology to all those people who were sexually assaulted or raped by Conservative MPs who were serving in the 1970 to 1974 period.
Yeah, that'd be good.
There's no president, this has never, the statements made by Mr. Fortescue have never ever been challenged, so I think it's fair to say that they're absolutely right. One other interesting side point was that, of course, many of the newspapers have been trying to undermine the inquiry, and there's been a lot of pressure on the chief officer investigating this, Chief Inspector Mike Veal of Wiltshire Police, who's a very good police officer indeed, and a very courageous one. But they're trying to get rid of him. And one of the people who's trying to get rid of him is a certain Lord Armstrong, who made an attack on him in the House of Lords. Not only saying this was a waste of money and Sir Edward was a wonderful man and it's just terrible that his reputation has been sullied and all the rest of it. And also in an exchange with another member of the House of Lords, Baroness Williams of Trafford, actually intimated how to get the Chief Constable sacked. It's in the House of Lords. Now, it does turn out that Lord Armstrong was actually the private secretary, the political private secretary of Sir Edward Heath during the time of his tenure as the Prime Minister. So he obviously must have been well aware of what was going on at the government of that time. It got worse than that, because the Daily Mail were the ones who really made quite an attack on Chief Constable Veal via Lord Armstrong. But I did remember, and the Daily Mail had made a statement, or quite a big article in the Scottish Daily Mail in July 2015, in which it was stated quite categorically that Lord Armstrong had covered up for the rape of children by Sir Peter Morrison MP, who was actually BPS to Margaret Thatcher. So it looks as if this policy of 1970-91 may well have been carried on. So I wrote to Paul Dacre, who's the editor-in-chief of the Associated Newspapers Group, who obviously owns the Daily Mail, and pointed this out to him. And eventually I got a rather nice letter to him saying, "Thank you very much indeed for that. I'll be getting in touch with the news editor over this." So at least we begin to turn the corner on this one. I've also made a formal complaint to the House of Lords for abuse of power, a politician making an attack on a chief constable in the course of his duties in an appalling way, in a case in which he may well be called as a witness or a possible accomplice in crime. So obviously the House of Lords, there's Lady Lucy Moncrief is the person who's Lady Lucy Moncrief Scott is the person who's trying to who's supposed to be investigating this. She's trying everything she can to get out of it, but I'm determined not to let her off on the hook, because I think if politicians start attacking police officers doing their duty, I think we really have some very serious problems. 5 minutes, yes, will be a second, we're almost finished now. Now, the other issue, of course, over, I referred to a little earlier, was to do with Kenny McCaskill. I think I mentioned Kenny McCaskill, but Elise Angelini. Now, of course, throughout this case, Elise Angelini all protested her innocence and actually stated that I was telling lies when I said that she was involved in the case, even though we had information, documentary information, including a letter from Angelini herself, showing that she was implicated in the case when she was first Procurator Fiscal in Aberdeen before she got promoted to be the Lord Advocate. Now, as it happens, I also got to David Scott here, because his initiative really showed the value of taking people on when they appear in public and challenging them, when they haven't got all their minions to write letters and emails and sort of do all the usual evasive things, but they face to face like we are now. So David went along, while I was in prison, David went along to meeting on the 28th of April 2014, which Kenny McCaskill was addressing in Perth, and of course brought up the matter of Holly Gregg and who was responsible. To our astonishment, Mr McCaskill said the person responsible who really stopped the case going ahead was none other than Dame Elise Angelini, who had been saying all the time she had nothing whatsoever to do with the case. Anyway, just to a little bit of fortune, which obviously shows the value of sticking with cases, which we all have to do. We know how long it takes to get justice, and we're not always quite sure we're going to get it, but we're all doing our best to try and get to that point. But my MP David McMullet was left office, and he'd been doing a lot of research on it, as I mentioned, lots of letters which I referred to earlier. But now it's been handed over to his successor, who's a Labour man called Mr Rashid. he said, well, Robert, can you come round and collect all the files, and then you can pass them on to Rashid, Mr. Rashid, and he will, I'm sure, look after you. And of course, within the files were documents I hadn't seen before, like such as letters from Mr. Mott to the Prime Minister about the case. All sorts of things there. But the one that interested me most of all was a letter from Kenny McCaskill to Mr. Moat. And Mr. McCaskill made no bones about the fact that yes, it was Angelini who was responsible for blocking the Holly Greig case.
Wow.
So there it is. Elise Angelini, absolutely steward on this. Now, thank you to Mr. McCaskill, who hasn't always been my best friend, I have to say. I've been clashed with him, including one public meeting when I challenged him about Angelini, and this was in Portobello, actually, and he said that Elise Angelini has been an outstanding law advocate. Now, outstanding can be interpreted in different ways, but at the time, people thought, well, I think he really admires her. Maybe he didn't really. Maybe in the end, he was going to come clean about it. Yeah, so, thank you, Kenny, wherever you are. I've really had a go at you from time to time, but you may not be my best pal now, but you've done something very, very useful. And I'm very glad I got a copy of that letter, because it really So there we have the person, the head of the justice system for 5 years, is capable of behaving in that way. What chance is there of any justice ever taking place in Scotland? None. Now I'm just going to finish I'm starting to finish now. I can see David's looking, yes, he's looking, yes, shut up and read. So, very last thing, I hope you won't be offended by this, but when I first got involved in the Holly Greig case and all the documents to go with it, I was making a speech in England. And someone said to me, Robert, you know, the Scottish government and the justice system, the Crown Office, it's terrible what they've done over the Holly Greig case. It sounds as if they're like the mafia, the way they're doing.